You're telling me they just carry these around in their ground vehicles? High Scholar Zixtal's upper appendages twitched in disbelief as they examined the small red container labeled Emergency Kit. Affirmative, Research Assistant Krell replied, their bioluminescent patches pulsing with excitement. And get this, they consider it primitive. The humans actually complain about how basic these survival tools are. The two Vexthori scientists hovered over the recovered artifact in the sterile examination chamber of their research vessel. The small red box had been salvaged from a human vehicle found in what the natives called Minnesota, a particularly hostile region of their planet, where temperatures regularly plunged below freezing. Well, let's see what passes for survival equipment among these Deathworlders, Zixtal muttered, using their manipulation field to carefully open the container. Though I doubt anything in here could actually... They stopped mid-sentence, mandibles clicking in confusion. What in the seven moons is this? Krell consulted their datapad. According to human documentation, it's called a road flare. They ignite it to produce light and heat in emergencies. They deliberately start fires? In an emergency? Zixtal's chromatophores flickered with alarm. That's insane! They could attract predators! Actually, Krell's voice took on that tone they used when about to share a particularly fascinating bit of human trivia. They want to be noticed. It's for signaling other humans for help. But that makes no sense. Why would they? Oh, it gets better, Krell interrupted, their enthusiasm barely contained. See this white crystalline substance? They call it salt. They spread it on frozen precipitation to create friction for their vehicles. Zixtal's sensory stalks drooped. They intentionally modify their environment's chemical composition to continue operating their vehicles in conditions that should clearly indicate the need to seek shelter? Precisely. And look at this. They call it a hand warmer. It's a small packet that produces heat through an exothermic reaction. They put them in their protective coverings to stay warm. So instead of avoiding dangerous temperatures, they've developed portable heat sources to continue functioning in them. Zixtal's voice had taken on a slightly hysterical edge. What kind of species looks at a potentially lethal environment and thinks, yes, I'll just carry some heat in my pocket? Krell's bioluminescence brightened with amusement. Humans, apparently. But wait until you see what they call a multi-tool. The next item they extracted was a compact metal device that unfolded to reveal various implements. Zixtal examined it with growing concern. Are these... weapons? Tools, actually. Though humans do have an impressive capacity to weaponize nearly anything. This particular device combines multiple functions: cutting, gripping, tightening, or loosening their mechanical fasteners. All in one portable unit, Zixtal finished, their tone somewhere between horror and admiration. The sheer efficiency of it is almost elegant, almost. The fascinating part isn't just the tools themselves, Krell continued, but how humans view them. This entire kit. They consider it the absolute bare minimum. Many humans carry far more extensive supplies. Zixtal's chromatophores cycled through various shades of disbelief. More? What more could they possibly... Their question was interrupted by an urgent alert from the ship's sensors. The research vessel's artificial gravity flickered as something massive passed nearby. Speaking of emergencies, Krell said, their bioluminescence dimming with concern. We appear to have wandered into an asteroid field that wasn't on our charts. Zixtal immediately accessed the sensor readings and felt their internal fluids grow cold. That's no asteroid field. Those are fragments from the Krixar mining operation that was destroyed last solar cycle. The debris is highly magnetized and... A violent shudder ran through the ship as multiple impacts registered against the hull. Warning signals blared as systems began failing across the board. Navigation is compromised, Krell reported, their appendages flying over the control interface. The magnetic interference is affecting our guidance systems. We're being pulled toward the largest cluster of debris. Engage emergency protocols, Zixtal ordered. Signal the nearest Vexthori vessel for immediate assistance. Communications are down. Krell's voice was tight with fear. And our emergency beacon isn't powerful enough to penetrate the magnetic interference. More impacts rattled the ship. A particularly large piece of debris smashed into their port side, sending them into an uncontrolled spin. Emergency containment fields flickered and failed as power systems were overwhelmed. We need to abandon ship, Zixtal decided, their training kicking in. Activate the escape pods! The pod launch systems are offline. The magnetic field is preventing them from functioning. The two scientists stared at each other in growing horror as their sophisticated technology failed around them. The ship's structure groaned as it was pulled inexorably toward the dense debris field that would tear it apart. Zixtal's gaze fell on the human emergency kit still open on the examination table. Their chromatophores pulsed with sudden inspiration. "Krell," they said slowly, "how much do you trust human engineering?" 20 minutes later, a small object tumbled out of the crippled research vessel. To any observer, it might have appeared to be just another piece of debris, if not for the bright red flare trailing behind it, its chemical fire burning even in the vacuum of space. The improvised distress signal had been crafted from the road flare's compounds, modified with elements from the hand warmers, and launched using a pressure vessel they'd constructed from the emergency kit's container and other salvaged materials. The multi-tool had proved invaluable in the rapid construction process. It wasn't elegant, it wasn't sophisticated, but as they huddled in the relatively intact section of their ship, watching the crude signal burn against the star-filled backdrop, both scientists had to admit it was effective. Calculating the debris field's magnetic properties and using it to enhance our signal's propagation, Krell mused, their bioluminescence slightly stronger now that they had a chance of survival. The humans would call this hacky, and they would probably be proud of us for it. Zixtal agreed, their chromatophores displaying a complex pattern of humor and irony, though I still don't understand their obsession with setting things on fire. "Well," Krell replied, their patches pulsing as they detected an approaching rescue vessel. "Perhaps that's because we've never been desperate enough to appreciate the appeal of controlled combustion." "I suppose," Zixtal admitted, watching their makeshift flare continue to burn. "Though I'm beginning to understand why they include these items in their emergency kits. Sometimes the primitive solution is the one that works." "Indeed, though let's agree not to mention in our report that we took survival advice from a species that thinks the appropriate response to dangerous weather is to carry pocket-sized heat sources." "Agreed. Though, perhaps we should requisition a few of these kits for our future expeditions, for research purposes, of course." "Of course." Krell's bioluminescence flickered with amusement. "Purely for research." As the rescue ship drew near, both scientists found themselves developing a new appreciation for human ingenuity. Perhaps there was something to be said for a species that looked at the deadly challenges of their environment and decided to pack a box of improbable solutions. After all, they had just survived a catastrophic system failure, using nothing but the contents of what humans considered a basic emergency kit. If that wasn't a testament to humanity's peculiar brand of practical insanity, nothing was. The next time they encountered human technology, they decided they would try to curb their initial dismissal of its seemingly primitive nature. Any species that could turn road flares and hand warmers into a space-worthy distress signal clearly deserved a more careful evaluation of their engineering practices, though they both silently agreed that they never needed to experience such an evaluation firsthand ever again. "And that's how we survived using nothing but the contents of a human emergency kit," Zixtal concluded, their chromatophores displaying a complex pattern that somehow managed to convey both pride and embarrassment simultaneously. The members of the Vexthori High Council of Scientific Research shifted uncomfortably in their hover seats. The grand chamber, usually filled with the gentle hum of scholarly debate, had fallen into an awkward silence. First speaker Marthy was the first to recover. "Let me ensure I understand this correctly," they began, each word carefully measured. "You deliberately ignited a chemical fire in space?" "Technically," Krell chimed in helpfully, their bioluminescence brightening with enthusiasm. "We created a modified propulsion system utilizing the oxidizing compounds from multiple human emergency devices, calibrated to—" "You made a space flare," interrupted second speaker Ven Tal, their sensory stalks twitching with what might have been a suppressed laugh. "A highly effective space flare," Zixtal defended, straightening their posture. "One that saved our lives and preserved valuable research data. Research data about primitive survival tools that you then used to survive," third speaker Jixnor observed dryly. "There's a certain poetry to that." The council chamber erupted in a cascade of color as various members' chromatophores flickered with different shades of amusement, concern, and intellectual curiosity. "The humans have a term for this," Krell offered. "They call it irony." "Yes, thank you, research assistant," Marthy cut in. "However, the question before us isn't about human linguistic concepts. We must address the implications of your creative solution." "Precisely," Ven Tal agreed. "If our most advanced emergency systems can be rendered useless by magnetic interference, while primitive chemical reactions remain viable, then perhaps we need to reassess our approach to emergency preparedness," Jixnor finished. Their color patterns shifted to the formal hues of an official proclamation. I move to establish a committee for the study of primitive technologies. A ripple of surprised color changes swept through the chamber. Forming a new research committee was no small matter, especially one focused on studying what many considered inferior technology. Seconded, Vental declared before anyone could object, with the suggestion that High Scholar Zixtal and Research Assistant Krell serve as primary investigators. Zixtal's chromatophores pulsed with alarm. Us? But we're theoretical researchers, not... You successfully modified human emergency equipment into a space-worthy distress signal while under extreme duress, Marthi pointed out. I'd say that qualifies you as experts in practical applications of primitive technology. Besides, added Jixnor, their patches displaying the subtle pattern that indicated amusement. You already have experience with human emergency kits. Speaking of which... A side door opened and a cargo drone floated in, carrying a large crate marked with human script. We took the liberty of acquiring a more extensive sampling of human emergency equipment, Marthi explained. Their survival gear, as they call it, comes in fascinating varieties. This particular collection was marketed for something called Doomsday Preppers. Krell approached the crate with undisguised excitement, their bioluminescence practically strobing. Are those human military rations? Among other things, Vental confirmed. We thought it prudent to thoroughly understand their approach to survival situations, especially given recent events. Zixtal moved to examine the crate's contents, their initial reluctance fading as they spotted familiar tools alongside new mysteries. Is that a solar-powered water purifier? The design is remarkably elegant for something so... primitive? Marthi suggested, their chromatophores displaying the equivalent of a knowing smile. I was going to say straightforward, Zixtal corrected diplomatically. This device is labeled hand-crank emergency radio, Krell reported, already deep in the crate. It generates power through physical exertion. How wonderfully inefficient, yet practical. I believe I speak for the entire council, Marthi announced, when I say we look forward to your detailed analysis of these primitive solutions, particularly their potential applications in situations where our more advanced technology might be compromised. Of course, Zixtal agreed, watching Krell practically vibrate with excitement over something called a Swiss Army knife. Though perhaps we should conduct our research in a controlled environment this time. Ah, yes. Vental's chromatophores flickered with mischief. About that, we've arranged for you to field test some of this equipment. There's a human training program called Wilderness Survival Course that we believe would provide valuable insights. Both scientists froze. Field test? Zixtal asked weakly. In the wilderness? Krell added, their enthusiasm dimming slightly. Indeed, Marthi confirmed. We've selected a location humans consider moderately challenging, something called the Pacific Northwest. I understand it rains frequently. But surely we could simulate, Zixtal began. The Council believes, Jixnor interrupted smoothly, that true understanding requires first-hand experience. After all, you've already demonstrated remarkable adaptability with human survival tools. That was an emergency! Consider this preparation for future emergencies, Marthi suggested. Besides, the humans do this recreationally. How challenging could it be? 2 weeks later, as Zixtal and Krell huddled under a rain-soaked tarp in the Olympic National Forest, trying to start a fire with something called a ferro rod, while rain dripped through their supposedly waterproof protective gear, they had their answer. Remind me, Zixtal muttered, their chromatophores displaying a pattern that could only be described as soggy resignation. Why humans consider this fun? Krell, who had somehow maintained their enthusiasm despite being equally drenched, looked up from their struggle with the fire starter. According to the guide, it builds character. Character, Zixtal repeated flatly. We're building character by failing to create fire in the rain. Actually, Krell's bioluminescence brightened with sudden triumph as sparks finally caught in their carefully prepared tinder bundle. We're succeeding at creating fire in the rain. The humans would call this a life skill. Watching the tiny flame grow despite the persistent drizzle, Zixtal had to admit there was something satisfying about the achievement, though they would never, under any circumstances, admit that to the Council. You realize, they said instead, warming their appendages by the growing fire, that when we return, they're going to want us to test everything in that crate. Ooh, do you think they'll let us try the emergency shelter construction next? I've been reading about something called a debris hut. Zixtal's chromatophores cycled through several patterns of disbelief before settling on resigned acceptance. You're actually enjoying this, aren't you? Of course. Krell gestured enthusiastically with the ferro rod. Think about it. We're experiencing firsthand how humans turn survival into a recreational activity. It's fascinating. Fascinating, Zixtal agreed dryly, is one word for it. They paused, watching their companion successfully add larger sticks to the fire. Though I suppose it's better than our last emergency. Exactly. And just think, once we master these primitive techniques, we'll be even better prepared for unexpected situations. The Council might even expand our research to include other human survival practices. Please don't give them ideas. I've seen something called extreme ironing in the human databases, and I have no desire to... They were interrupted by a distant sound that made both scientists freeze. Something large was moving through the forest, heading their way. What was that? Krell whispered, their bioluminescence dimming instinctively. According to our briefing, Zixtal replied quietly. This region is home to several large omnivorous mammals, including ursines. Ursines? Krell's patches pulsed with alarm. You mean bears? The creatures humans consider both dangerous and inexplicably cute? The same. Zixtal reached for their emergency kit. Fortunately, the humans provided equipment for this scenario. The noise-making device? And the chemical deterrent spray. Though I sincerely hope we don't need to. A large black bear emerged from the underbrush, regarded their camp with obvious interest, and began ambling toward their food storage. Right, Zixtal said calmly, their chromatophores displaying a complex pattern that somehow conveyed both terror and determination. Time to field test more human survival equipment. Krell raised the air horn with one appendage and the bear spray with another. For science, Zixtal agreed. Though let's leave this part out of the official report. The ensuing chaos would later be described by nearby hikers as the weirdest bear encounter ever, featuring what appeared to be two glowing jellyfishes successfully defending their campsite with what one witness swore was perfect textbook bear safety technique. The Council, when eventually presented with the full report on human survival gear testing, would decide that perhaps some experiments were best conducted in more controlled environments. Though they had to admit, the results were impressively effective, if unconventional. And somewhere in the vast database of human knowledge, a new entry was quietly added to the growing file of things that shouldn't work but do anyway. Alien scientists successfully applying human wilderness survival techniques against native Earth fauna. The humans who later reviewed this entry would simply nod and add it to their ever-growing list of evidence that their species' particular brand of practical insanity was, in fact, universally applicable, even if it did occasionally involve setting things on fire in space. Absolutely not, Zixtal declared, their chromatophores displaying the Vexthori equivalent of someone putting their foot down. We are not inviting humans to participate in our research program. The Committee for the Study of Primitive Technologies meeting chamber erupted in a dazzling display of argumentative color patterns. After 6 months of studying human survival techniques, including 3 more field exercises that had cemented Zixtal's opinion about recreational camping, this was the most controversial proposal yet. But think of the collaborative potential. Krell's bioluminescence was practically strobing with excitement. Who better to teach us about human emergency preparedness than actual humans? Perhaps the ones who invented something called extreme survival TV shows? Zixtal countered. I've reviewed the footage. They deliberately put themselves in dangerous situations for entertainment. First speaker Marthy's chromatophores rippled with amusement. That's precisely why we've selected candidates from their professional emergency response teams instead. No. What did you call them? Reality TV survivalists? We've already approved the exchange. Second speaker Vental added cheerfully. 2 human emergency preparedness experts will arrive next week to assist with your research. Zixtal's sensory stalks drooped. I don't suppose there's any chance of convincing you this is a terrible idea? None whatsoever, third speaker Jixinor confirmed, especially after your successful bear encounter demonstrated the practical applications of human techniques. We panicked and used an air horn. Successfully, Krell pointed out helpfully. The bear left and no one got hurt. Classic human problem solving. Before Zixtal could formulate a suitably scathing response, the chamber's communication system chimed. Ah, Marthy's chromatophores shifted to formal patterns. It seems our human guests have arrived early. How efficient of them. The chamber's entrance portal dilated, revealing 2 humans in crisp uniforms. They carried enormous backpacks that seemed to contain enough equipment for a small expedition. Sarah Chen, Emergency Response Coordinator. The shorter human introduced herself. "And this is Mike O'Brien, Wilderness Search and Rescue Specialist." "Pleasure to meet you all," Mike added, grinning as he took in the color-shifting aliens. "Love what you've done with the bioluminescence. Very practical for low-light conditions." Krell's patches pulsed with delight. "You see? They understand the value of natural illumination. We have so much to learn from each other." "Speaking of learning," Sarah said, setting down her pack with a thud, "we brought some equipment for hands-on demonstrations. Hope you don't mind, but we heard about your bear encounter and thought you might appreciate some additional training." "And some better gear," Mike added, already unpacking. "These new ultralight bear canisters are a game-changer. Plus, we've got some prototype emergency beacons that work on multiple frequencies. Figured they might come in handy after that space debris incident." Zixtal's chromatophores involuntarily displayed interest before they could suppress it. "Multiple frequencies? Our standard emergency beacons only—" They caught themselves. "I mean, that's hardly necessary for our research purposes," said the scientist who MacGyvered a space flare. Sarah remarked dryly. "Yeah, that report made quite an impression on our engineering department. They're still trying to figure out how you modified the chemical composition to work in vacuum." "It was quite simple, actually," Krell began enthusiastically. "We just recalibrated the oxidizing compounds to—" "Perhaps," Zixtal interrupted hastily, "we should focus on the official exchange program parameters." "Right," Mike agreed, pulling out what appeared to be a holographic training module. "We've designed a comprehensive course that combines our practical experience with your theoretical research. First up, Arctic survival techniques." Zixtal's chromatophores paled. "Arctic, as in ice and snow?" "Well, we heard you had some experience with Minnesota winters," Sarah said with a suspiciously innocent smile. "Thought you might want to build on that." The council members' color patterns shifted in what was definitely suppressed laughter. "Besides," Mike continued, "we've got some fascinating new hybrid tech to test. Your thermal regulation systems combined with our cold weather gear could revolutionize survival equipment." "Just think," Krell enthused, already examining the human equipment. "We could develop protocols that work in any environment. Hot, cold, underwater, zero gravity." "Let's start with basic Arctic conditions," Zixtal suggested quickly, before anyone could propose testing equipment in more extreme environments, preferably in a controlled setting. Sarah and Mike exchanged glances. "About that," Sarah began, "we thought the best way to understand how different survival techniques work together would be—" "A joint Arctic training mission," Mike finished cheerfully. "Nothing too extreme. Just a week in Alaska testing various equipment combinations." The chamber went silent except for Krell's excited bioluminescent pulsing. "A week," Zixtal repeated flatly, "in one of Earth's most hostile environments." "Well, moderate to hostile," Mike corrected. "We'll stay well above the Arctic Circle." "Consider it a cultural exchange," Sarah added. "You teach us about space flares. We'll teach you how to build a proper igloo." "An igloo." Zixtal's chromatophores displayed a complex pattern of disbelief. "You want to teach spacefaring scientists how to build ice houses." "Hey, igloos are brilliant engineering," Mike defended. "Perfect emergency shelter in Arctic conditions. Plus, the principles apply to all sorts of survival situations. Did you know you can build one on Mars?" That caught everyone's attention. "Mars?" First speaker Marthy's sensory stalks perked up. "You've tested emergency shelters on Mars?" "Part of the new colonization protocols," Sarah explained. "We've been adapting traditional survival techniques for extraterrestrial conditions. Actually, we were hoping to get your input on some of the designs." 2 hours later, Zixtal found themselves somehow approved for not just the Arctic expedition, but also 3 additional collaborative field tests on various planets with interesting environmental challenges. "Look on the bright side," Krell said as they reviewed the equipment lists. "At least we'll have proper training before attempting any of this." "That's what concerns me," Zixtal replied. "Their idea of proper training seems to involve deliberately exposing themselves to increasingly hazardous conditions." "It's called building resilience through controlled exposure," Mike called from where he was demonstrating something called a survival bivouac to fascinated council members. "Besides," Sarah added, "wait until you see what we can do with your phase shift technology combined with our cold weather gear. Ever wondered what it's like to stay completely warm in -40 degrees? "No," Zixtal said firmly. "I have never wondered that, because I have the basic survival instinct to avoid such conditions." "Perfect!" Sarah beamed. "That means you'll have an unbiased perspective for the equipment testing." Krell's bioluminescence brightened. Does this mean we get to try the new emergency beacons too? After the Arctic training, Mike promised. We've got some ideas about combining them with your long-range communication technologies. Could revolutionize search and rescue operations. Assuming we survive the Arctic training, Zixtal muttered. That's the spirit. Sarah clapped them on what approximated a shoulder. Survival is mostly attitude anyway. Well, attitude and really good gear. Speaking of gear, Mike added, wait until you see what we've done with those hand warmers you used in the space flare. Our engineers got some ideas. Watching the humans enthusiastically explain their modifications to primitive technology, Zixtal had a sudden, horrifying realization. This was just the beginning. Humanity's particular brand of practical insanity was about to be combined with Vexthori technical capabilities. The galaxy, they suspected, would never be quite the same. Oh, Krell exclaimed, examining something in Mike's pack. Is that a fusion-powered camping stove? Definitely never the same. Just wait until they find out about our plans for the underwater training module, Sarah whispered to Mike. Zixtal's chromatophores displayed alarm. The what? Nothing, both humans said quickly. First speaker Marthy's color patterns showed entirely too much amusement. I believe this exchange program will be most educational. Educational, Zixtal repeated weakly, watching Krell and Mike excitedly discuss something called a jet boil system. Indeed, Jixnor agreed, though perhaps we should wait until after the Arctic training to mention the volcano research proposal. Zixtal's chromatophores went completely blank. In the background, Sarah was teaching Krell how to modify a standard emergency beacon to work in geologically active areas. You never know when you might need to signal for help from inside a lava tube. Is it too late to request a transfer to theoretical research? Zixtal asked no one in particular. Much too late, the entire council replied in perfect chromatic harmony. And somewhere in the vast expanse of space, the ghost of that first improvised space flare seemed to flicker with distinctly human amusement. After all, who knew that emergency road flares would lead to interstellar cooperation in pushing the boundaries of survival technology? The humans, probably. They seem to have a knack for this sort of thing.